circulated in document A/71/899, and a draft resolution entitled Status of Internally Displaced Persons and Refugees from Abkhazia, Georgia, and the Tskhinvali Region of South Ossetia, Georgia, issued as document A/71/L71. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Georgia to introduce draft resolution A/71/L71.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Every second last year, one person was forced to flee from conflict, violence, and disaster. We have 65 million displaced people around the globe today, a record high number. Among them are up to 400,000 IDPs and refugees from my country, Georgia, uprooted in several waves of ethnic cleansing from Abkhazia and Tskhinvali Region, South Ossetia, currently under foreign occupation. They have been living in protracted displacement for more than 20 years, and despite the time difference with Georgia, it's almost midnight there, they're closely watching us right now. And I would like to share with you a message I received from one of the IDPs from Abkhazia, a 21-year-old Tamar, in which she describes her feelings about displacement that I believe unite all displaced persons. She writes, and I quote, "I have a home, the one I haven't been given a chance to live in, the one I haven't been given a chance to explore, the one I love. And I have a house, the one I currently live in, merely a roof over my head. While someone may have a house, they may not have a home where they feel free and accepted. Our only hope is to return home even if the house is no longer standing." Dear colleagues, today I take this podium to address you on behalf of my government and the name of the forcibly displaced individuals like Tamar to introduce and solicit your support for the draft resolution contained in document A/71/L71, Status of Internally Displaced Persons and Refugees from Abkhazia, Georgia, and Tskhinvali Region, Georgia, under Agenda Item 32, Protracted Conflicts in Guam Area and Their Implications for International Peace, Security, and Development. This organization unanimously recognizes the guiding principles on internal displacement as the key international framework for the protection of the internally displaced persons. Through this resolution, we would like to once again galvanize the international support to reaffirm those very rights for the displaced populations in Georgia. The overwhelming majority, 88.3% of respondents, indicated their wish to UNHCR intention survey to return voluntarily to their area of origin. In other words, we call for the application of universally acknowledged principles to the case of the displaced population in Georgia. The draft resolution before you stands for three fundamental principles: securing the rights of the displaced, including the right to safe and dignified return as well as property rights, unacceptability of forced demographic changes, and the need for unimpeded humanitarian access. Furthermore, the resolution emphasizes the importance of the Geneva international discussions mandated by the six-point ceasefire agreement of August 12, 2008, and calls upon all participants to be more active in producing tangible results. For that very reason, both the resolution and the subsequent report of the UN Secretary General serve as reference points in the Geneva international discussions and complement the work on humanitarian issues. Distinguished delegates, the security and human rights situation in the occupied territories is being exacerbated by continued installation of razor wire fences and so-called border signs, kidnappings and arbitrary detentions, seizure of property, restrictions on free movement and residence, as well as on the access to education in one's own language, all based on the ground of ethnic origin. The close of the entry and exit points across the occupation line by the regime in control in Abkhazia region severely restricts the freedom of movement of the local population and creates additional impediments to the return of the IDPs and refugees to their homes. On the 9th of April 2017, a so-called referendum was held in the Tskhinvali region to rename it as Republic of South Ossetia, the state of Alania, mirroring the Republic of North Ossetia, Alania in the Russian Federation. The so-called treaties on integration with the Russian Federation and subsequent creation of joint group of armed forces, as well as merging law enforcement and investigative bodies, reflect policy of the factual annexation of Georgia's regions and demonstrate the need for adequate, immediate, and consolidated international reaction. Despite the continuous call for access to Abkhazia and Tskhinvali regions, the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, as well as the Special Rapporteur on the Human Rights of IDPs, were repeatedly denied access to these regions by the regimes in control. In response, the UN Human Rights Council expressed serious concerns over the continuous violations and the humanitarian situation within the occupied regions of Georgia, and on 24th of March 2017 adopted the resolution 34/37, which was co-sponsored by 43 states. In complete absence of basic safeguards to monitor the situation on the ground, the HRC resolution calls for immediate access of the Office of the High Commissioner and other international and regional human rights mechanisms to the occupied territories, while expressing concern over the fact that internally displaced persons and refugees from these regions continue to be deprived of their right to return to their places of origin in safety and with dignity. Excellencies, pending their return, the government of Georgia makes every effort to alleviate burden and ensure decent conditions for displaced population in accordance with the national strategy and its relevant action plan. In the end of 2015, with the support of UNHCR, MRA joint project, the Livelihood Action Plan 2016-2017 was adopted, which provides opportunities for IDPs and their host communities to fulfill their potential by gaining financial independence from the state and becoming self-reliant. In parallel, the government pursues durable housing projects for the displaced population through housing construction, procurement of apartments and individual houses, and privatization of property. Despite the current artificial barriers, we also continue to respond to the concerns of our compatriots living in the Abkhazia and Tskhinvali regions, ethnic Abkhaz and Ossetians, who are an integral part of our common history and future. We believe that one day we will all live together in peace and prosperity, with the families united and communities returned to their native soil. Distinguished delegates, the pledge to leave no one behind has been a powerful message of recent frameworks initiated by the international society. The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, the Sendai Framework on Disaster Risk Reduction, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. As a joint commitment, it is important to catalyze progress on addressing the needs of the IDPs worldwide. The 2016 World Humanitarian Summit in Istanbul and the Agenda for Humanity, along with the New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants, increased international focus on the need to prevent and reduce forced displacement by addressing its root causes. Prioritizing conflict prevention and sustaining peace by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. Antonio Guterres, has been further encouraging to seek renewed efforts to capitalize on the momentum that has been created during the last few years. Dear colleagues, when one person is arbitrarily expelled from his or her domicile, we call it a crime. But when hundreds of thousands or even millions are forcibly displaced and are not allowed to go back to their home, we call it a humanitarian crisis. In fact, we should call it no less than mass crime. The rights of displaced should be acknowledged, reaffirmed, and protected regardless of political processes. In his report, A/71/899, the UN Secretary General is also explicit in that, and I quote, "The individual's right to return, in the case of an internally displaced person, derives from his or her right to freedom of movement as stipulated in international human rights instruments. It is essential to recognize that the return is both a human right and a humanitarian issue, and therefore cannot be directly linked to the political questions or the conclusion of peace agreements. It must be addressed irrespective of any solution to the underlying conflict," unquote. One cannot argue against this humanitarian cause. Each and every member state concerned with the current humanitarian catastrophe in the world must take a responsible decision when the issue is raised in the General Assembly. Therefore, I once again urge you to vote yes on the resolution A71L71 to recognize and safeguard the rights of the displaced population from Abkhazia, Georgia, and Tskhinvali Region, South Ossetia, Georgia. Your conscious and sustained vote in favor of this resolution is a vote in support of the principles of humanity and of international law, which we all subscribe to. I thank you.
We have heard the last speaker, an explanation of vote before the vote. The Assembly will now take a decision on draft resolution A/71/L71 entitled Status of Internally Displaced Persons and Refugees from Abkhazia, Georgia, and the Tskhinvali Region, South Ossetia, Georgia. A recorded vote has been requested. We shall now begin the voting process. Those in favor of draft resolution A/71/L71, please signify. Those against and abstentions.
The General Assembly is now voting on draft resolution A/71/L71 entitled Status of Internally Displaced Persons and Refugees from Abkhazia, Georgia, and Tskhinvali Region, South Ossetia, Georgia. Will all delegations kindly confirm that their votes are accurately reflected on the board? The voting has been completed. Please lock the machine.
The result of the vote is as follows. In favor, 80, against, 14, abstentions, 61. Draft resolution A/71/L71 is adopted.